Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the NSA singers from the Nashville School of the Arts.
We are searchlights we can see in the dark. We are rockets pointed up at the stars. We are billions of beautiful hearts. And you sold us down the river too far. What about us? What about all the times you said you had the answers? What about us? What about all the broken happy ever afters? What about us? What about all the plans that ended in disasters? What about love? What about trust? What about us? We are problems that want to be solved. We are children that need to be loved. We were willing, we came when you called. But man, you fooled us. Enough is enough. Oh, what about us? What about all the times you said you had the answers? What about us? What about all the broken happy ever afters? What about us? What about all the plans that ended in disasters? Oh, what about love? What about trust? What about us? I don't want control, I want to let go. Are you ready? I'll be ready. 'Cause now it's time to let them know. We are ready. What about us? What about all the times you said you had the answers? What about us? What about all the broken happy ever afters? What about us? What about all the plans that ended in disasters? Oh, what about love? What about trust? What about us? 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 What about us?
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome President and CEO, iNACOL, Susan Patrick.
Thank you. Please join me in another round of applause for the incredible performance opening the iNACOL Symposium 2018. Thank you so much. I just want to welcome all of you in our opening today. I have so much gratitude, such deep gratitude for the incredible work that you're doing. What we're talking about is deep and lasting and sustainable change. And I ask you and invite you to reflect on the journey that you're on. And I ask you to reflect how you came into this work. What is your why? What is your truth? And where you want to go? The world is changing, and so too must our education systems change to prepare our youth to find their truth and to equip our communities for what the future brings. The future of work and the future of jobs is changing dramatically. You may have been reading about this, but about 50% of jobs are going to be moved to automation. And what this is going to require, according to the World Economic Forum, is vast changes in our education system and our learning environments. It's going to move to competency and portfolios of student work and student evidence. With 60% of our occupations having 30% of those functions automated, there is a massive global mismatch of skills. In fact, just this week, the Bank of England reported that economists may be vastly underestimating how fast the robots are coming. What does this mean? Artificial intelligence right now is writing poetry. Those sports articles that you're reading, the sports reporting is being done by AI every day. Economic forecasting at your investment firms is happening through artificial intelligence. 10,000 new articles a day are being written by artificial intelligence on Wikipedia. To say nothing of the self-driving cars, right? What does this mean? This means that human beings, our youth, our future of work, people are going to need the capabilities to discern truth, what is ethical, and what is just. Ask who is programming all of this. And the sources of data that AI is drawing from are likely to replicate inequities in the system if we don't have leadership that can problem solve, understand context, understand the changing world that we live in, and make decisions that are right, that are just, that are ethical towards a more open and just society. This is inevitable. This is inevitable. And it's here. It's not just coming, it's here. So too must the future of education change. But education is a humanistic pursuit. And the conversations around the globe right now are very different about what it means to have an education system that is preparing our youth and our societies for future prosperity. The conversations in other nations are looking deeply at the aims, the purposes of education. Our leading nations around the world are having a different conversation about broader goals for what students need to know and be able to do, checkpoints on progress, what it means around quality processes, examining equal and unequal inputs and resources, outcomes, and a focus on equity. They are looking at education and transformation towards networks of learning spaces inside and outside of school that are culturally responsive, culturally inclusive, and the role of educators are designing this new world. The role of educators is a priority, and building educator capacity has never been more important than it is now. It also means that diverse stakeholders in our communities must be brought together to articulate these goals and to drive this change. There is growing recognition around the world that central governments are too big. They are no longer agile enough to adapt to the rapid pace of change. This pace of change is unprecedented. We need flexibility to respond, and that is where local communities excel. We have got to build on the assets and strengths of our local communities in driving the future and in driving the future of education. We need the courage to design schools on the values and beliefs that we hold dear, on the hopes and goals of communities setting the vision and taking collective action. This is about whole system transformation, not just one portion, not just tweaking the existing system we have. It is about looking at deep root causes of structural inequities in our education system and imagining the future that we hope for our youth and our students, not just a piece, but what is a meaningful qualification? Why is it that students earn a diploma and 60% of our first-year college students have some form of remediation and aren't ready for college? We need to get serious about what it means to have a meaningful qualification in our secondary schools, in our colleges and universities, and across the workforce. And that, my friends, is a competency-based system with evidence of student work and learning and recognition of prior learning. It's about transforming roles. Thank you. And it's about transforming this alignment between what is possible in K through 12, higher ed, and the workforce. Let's tear down those walls. This system transformation is about opening opportunities for all youth. Thankfully, all of you have rolled up your sleeves and are here to make this transformation happen. And you think about whether we know we're operating within a theory of action or a theory of change, we are. So ask yourself, what is your theory of change? Now, I'll give full attribution to Eric Wenmuth, who I was just with 2 weeks ago in Arkansas, who said he's traveled around the world and he thinks there may be 3 theories of action that he hears education systems operating under. And I'll be real brief here. Theory number 1 is what he calls show up. If you show up, you earn seat time and you get some kind of a degree. Is that going to prepare our kids for the future? What is our system based on? Theory 2 is that students are some sort of empty vessels to be filled up with knowledge, heavily relying on textbooks. Instructional materials and assessments drive what happens in the classroom. Empty vessels to be filled up. And he said theory number 3 is lighting the fire. It's about creating future makers. It's about building knowledge and skills and abilities to navigate this complex world, analyze, having the ethics, having the problem solving, lighting the fire for learning how to learn, and navigate towards an uncertain future with success. Transforming learning has to operate within that 3rd theory. What's your theory? And what's your why? Examine this. We've got to take time to return to the fundamentals of our system and understanding the why that drives us. It's time to return to a conversation and examination of the why of education as a public good. The context that our youth will face will require agency, and I define agency as having the ability to make choices and to act on them, as well as ethics. So the characteristics of a modern future-focused education is to design for the learner and for community needs in the future, to create our future makers. We ask ourselves, are the designs that we are created aimed at human excellence? And this will require whole system transformation. So what are we talking about? The traditional system versus the competency-based system? Our current system, the traditional system, is designed to rank and sort students. We have high levels of variability, grading students A to F, and then we send kids to college based on a GPA, ranking and sorting them. It's a narrow set of academic expectations based on a fixed mindset and is time-based. And guess what? Seat time is a very poor proxy of whether a student's learned or not. Joanne McEacham said, "Don't get good at a bad game." Don't get good at a bad game. Don't get good at a bad game. What do we have to unlearn? This transformation will cause changes in culture, first and foremost, 2, pedagogy, to be more personalized, and 3, we must examine the very structures in front of us in our systems. And guess what? We can do this. We can build this bridge. We're not tweaking the existing system. We are creating a system that will prepare our students for the future. And a competency-based system is built on a growth mindset that all kids can learn, is mastery-based, not Carnegie-based, seat time-based, and it's organized to create personal pathways for learning that ignite the fire for students to create culturally responsive and inclusive learning environments inside and outside of school. So these terms are really important because if we don't use the terms in a way where we convey what we mean, it can lead to poor quality implementation. So a competency-based system means that students advance upon demonstrated mastery. Those learning objectives are clear and tied to their goals, and they empower students. Assessments are for learning and empower student learning. And if students don't quite get it, in the moment they receive immediate supports until they do, so that success is the only option and that learning outcomes emphasize competencies that include the broader range of knowledge and skills. Personalized learning is per person, having tailored learning for their own strengths and needs and interests, enabling that student voice and choice in how, when, where they learn, and provide flexible pathways and supports to ensure mastery of the highest standards possible. And Phyllis from LEAP, who will be doing one of our amazing TED Talks this morning, has done incredible work and research on entire personalized learning frameworks. So folks, don't say there aren't clear definitions in the field, even if you don't use these that I'm saying, but know and mean what you say, because it will influence the quality of your implementation, and we have got to get serious about the quality of our implementations in this work in competency-based education and personalized learning. Thank you. And what does it look like? It means that every student has a student profile, a learning passport for their future, and that there are trust and recognition systems on validating credits and qualifications. And that might mean micro-certifications and micro-credits. But it's about reimagining college access. You've got the Mastery Transcript Consortium out there, changing the way that diplomas might look, exhibitions and portfolios to get into some of our nation's leading colleges, evidence of this powerful learning, and the projects and the work that students are doing to prepare them for the future. We are also publishing quality frameworks. Last week, Chris Sturgis published a book on quality frameworks for competency-based education. And earlier this year with Catherine Casey, published a report on equity strategies for competency-based ed. The National Equity Project defines equity as every child receiving what he or she needs to develop the full academic and social potential. So working towards equity in schools involves ensuring equal outcomes for all students, interrupting inequitable practices, and discovering and cultivating the unique talents, gifts, and interests that every human possesses. If we are not actively dismantling inequities in the system, we are contributing to it. So this change is happening quickly. You see that states are opening up their state policy, allowing innovation zones to allow competency-based education to take hold. Just from 2012 to 2018, we have 48 states. And in personalized learning, just a few years ago in 2015, we had pockets of innovation that are growing, and they're growing in regions by professional learning communities, learning profiles for students to learn inside and outside of school, and integrated supports services. We are trying to lift up the good work happening across the field in our publishing. from iNACOL and Competency Works. But what has to happen is all about the work that you're doing. You are the future makers. So please bring with you openness, respect, love for yourself, love for our youth, love for our communities, our educators, our leaders. Because you are the future makers making this happen. Form your why and get clear about your why, and let that be your North Star. In OECD, in 2030, we will have a very, very different world ahead of us. And the learning life of people coming into school today is going to be so different from what their expectations are in 2030 going out into the world. We are driving the transformation of learning. We are the future makers, and we must build trust. We must have the ability to wonder what is possible, an agency, the ability to have choices and to act on them, and the ability to design a journey. Michael Fullan describes pedagogy as the driver, technology is the accelerator, and culture is the runway. This is about mastery, not Carnegie, and it's beyond one size fits all. So I invite, during the iNACOL Symposium, an open and respectful dialogue to challenge ideas, to open minds, and also to challenge assumptions on the end games. If we can't change the way we teach and engage in new models of success, prototype, backwards design, if we can't harness the assets in our own communities, we will be staggeringly unprepared for the future we face. You are the future makers. Don't get good at a bad game. Change the game. Change the game. It is my pleasure right now, in the spirit of honoring change makers, 3 people working to transform education for our TED Talks this morning. 3 people that are driving this transformation and change. Please let me introduce our 3 keynote TED Talk speakers today. First, Tony Monfiletto. Tony is from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and has worked in education since 1990. He began his career at the Chicago Panel on Public School Policy to promote the restructuring of Chicago public schools. After leaving Chicago in 1993, he joined the staff of the Legislative Education Study Committee in Santa Fe, where he specialized in public school finance. This big picture work was fundamental in establishing the context for cutting-edge small high schools in his hometown. His work is focused on using the local wisdom and reciprocal relationships with communities to create schools that provide the best education for the students who need it most. In 2008, Tony began working on ACE Leadership High School, the first in a network of next generation of career-focused schools in New Mexico. The Leadership Schools Network has grown now to 4 schools: ACE, Health, Technology, and Siembra Entrepreneurship High Schools. These institutions are dedicated to the premise that learning by doing, positive youth development, and the highest level of private sector collaboration will result in schools that make Albuquerque a healthier and more prosperous community. Tony is also a Pajara Aspen and Sizer Fellow. Our second TED Talk, Phyllis Lockett. Phyllis Lockett has been dedicated to transforming education in the US for more than a decade. She is currently the founder and CEO of LEAP Innovations, an organization headquartered in Chicago that connects innovation and education to transform how students learn. LEAP works directly with educators and innovators across the country to pilot, research, and scale personalized learning, innovative practices across classrooms and outside learning environments. Before starting LEAP, Phyllis was a driving force behind Chicago's charter movement. As founding president and CEO of New Schools for Chicago, she helped raise more than $70 million to support opening 80 new public schools. Her work more than tripled the number of charter schools and drove Chicago's first magnet school replication. Currently, Phyllis is a board member of ASCD an independent director of the Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago, and serves as a board member on several civic organizations, including the Economic Club of Chicago, the Chicago Network, and the Adler Planetarium. She is also a member of the Commercial Club of Chicago and a Henry Crown Fellow with the Aspen Institute. She earned a master's degree from Kellogg Graduate School of Management at Northwestern and a Bachelor of Science in Industrial Engineering from Purdue University. And finally, Carlos Moreno. A proud native New Yorker, Carlos Moreno is a passionate education leader committed to supporting school and district leaders who are creating high-quality, non-traditional schools. He is a co-executive director for Big Picture Learning, a nonprofit organization since 1995, has developed over 150 such schools in the United States and throughout the world. As Big Picture's co-executive director, Carlos is the visionary for all U.S. school and district-wide programs. Carlos leads a national team of regional directors, designs and leads Big Picture's several annual conferences, and coordinates leadership development and support services for school and district leaders, and works with scores of non-Big Picture schools that wish to incorporate elements of the Big Picture learning design. He also leads the Deeper Learning Equity Fellowship in partnership with the International's Networks for Public Schools. Carlos holds an undergraduate degree in marketing and business from Johnson & Wales University, along with a master's degree in educational leadership. Carlos was named a Pahara Institute Fellow, a fellowship designed to sustain diverse, high-potential leaders who are reimagining public education and who will shape the future of educational excellence and equity movement. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Tony Monfiletto from Future Focused Education.
Good morning, everyone. Susan, thank you very much for inviting me to be here today, and I'm honored and flattered to be here and to be with such illustrious other speakers, Carlos and Phyllis. I'll begin my talk with my grandfather. This is my grandfather. He's in the sidecar of this motorcycle. My grandfather was a soldier in World War I. He was in the Army and had a 6th grade education, came from a small farm in southern Colorado, and was destined to dig trenches in World War I and be involved in trench warfare. But he was found by the U.S. Army because he had a gift for language. And he was able to speak French. And he learned that he was able to speak French when he was in Paris. And he spent his time in Paris as an interpreter. So he worked in diplomacy in Paris with a 6th grade education, the son of a farmer from La Jara, Colorado. Now, he joined the Army to escape the segregation and racism that existed in his hometown. He left Paris, came back to La Jara, and was treated like another Mexican. He dealt with segregation and the indignity of being a veteran and a hero to his own community in a system that didn't respect his skills, talents, patriotism. My grandfather had children, my uncles and aunts, who had a deep sense of their own identity. They joined the Chicano movement. They knew who they were, and they knew what their purpose was. My friend Javier Benavidez is fond of saying, "We are the ones that our ancestors have been waiting for." And I think about that often. And today, as I'm talking to you, I'm imagining my grandfather and my uncles and aunts and my ancestors in the room with me today. And imagining what would they want for me to tell you. And I think what they would want me to say is, we have challenges in our communities. But the only way to address those challenges will be to invest in the local wisdom of those communities. There are no imported ideas that can fix local issues. Investing in the people and their local wisdom is the answer to transforming local communities, to make them more equitable and just. Albert Einstein is attributed with saying, "You cannot solve a problem with the same consciousness that created it." My consciousness out of graduate school was as a school finance expert. Tax policy, cost-benefit analysis, labor theory, all of those things, that was the toolkit that I had. That was my consciousness. So I returned back to New Mexico to work for the legislature. I wrote the appropriations bill. We're full state funded. That's an incredible amount of power for a 27-year-old to have. I thought, I'm going to take these skills and I'm going to take this knowledge and I'm going to move it into the classroom, and I became a teacher. And I thought, I'm going to work in the system and I'm going to take these skills and I'm going to do transformational work because I'm going to have an ed finance background, and that's such a missing competency from the work in schools. Fast forward 4 years, and you have the Leadership Schools Network. And that network is about establishing a platform that connects poor, disengaged, disenfranchised communities with high-growth employers. So understanding what are the skills and knowledge that these kids who are off track or have dropped out of high school need to have in order to get a good paying job in our growing economy. Enter Moneka Stevens Cordova. Moneka essentially told me, you are not going to solve this problem because you're trying to solve the problem with the consciousness that created it. So my ideas about this transactional relationship with communities, which I thought was reciprocal in nature, we're going to have employers and communities. What's good for employers is going to be good for communities. We're going to pipeline kids into health careers in our health school. That was not reciprocal at all. And I talked to my friends, Michelle Melendez and Javier Benavidez and Enrique Cardiel, and I said, hey guys, will you help me with this healthcare school? And they said, no, we're not going to do that because healthcare is the problem and health is the solution. And as a matter of fact, 80% of the causes of our communities being unhealthy are caused by things that have nothing to do with the services that we provide people, the treatment that we offer to people. Instead, the problem lies in poverty, racism, geography. Those are the problems that are making our communities unhealthy. So Moneka joined our team. She's a community organizer, and she went to work. And what she did was she brought the community to the school to pitch projects that deal with the social determinants of health. So you might walk into Health Leadership High School and you might see folks from all across the community pitching project ideas that have to do with nutrition. They might have to do with child abuse. these projects come in, and then students and teachers choose the projects that are rich in context, super complex, and they go out and become the change agents in their own communities. Now, you might go to Health Leadership High School at their exhibitions, and you might walk into an exhibition and see a young person with their project being a root cause analysis. They might be interviewing a young mother who went into preterm labor, and she was in the emergency room. And they would ask, how did you get to the emergency room? And she would say, well, I'm diabetic, and diabetes is a cause of preterm labor often. And they would say, well, why are you diabetic? And the mother might say, well, I don't eat very well. Why don't you eat very well? Well, I have a high-calorie, low-nutrition diet. And the reason I have a high-calorie, low-nutrition diet is because we're poor. And my dad lost his job. How did your dad lose his job? Well, our car broke down. And he tried to use public transportation, but the public transportation in our city is unreliable. So he couldn't get to work on time, so he got fired. And that young person, through that project, understands what is the cause of diabetes. It's not just a bad diet. It's a lack of access to good jobs, work opportunities, transportation. All of those things are part of how you get diabetes, which results in preterm labor, which results in an underweight baby. That same young person will finish their experience at Health Leadership High School, working at Loveless Hospital in their Labor to Love program. And her internship will be as a maternity navigator. And so she'll bring her knowledge of root cause analysis and her skills to be able to work with young parents to help them birth full-term babies. That's an incredible story. My consciousness about pipelining kids into the health sector would never have resulted in the kind of change that those young people will bring to their own community. This is Javi. Javi is our mascot. Javi is a superhero. We chose Javi as our mascot because we believe that young people are the answers to our stickiest problem. And investing in young people, the young people are going to save us. Last year, I was in Memphis, and I was there for the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination in Memphis. And at the Lorraine Hotel, they had a commemoration. And I got to see Jesse Jackson speak at the commemoration. And Jesse Jackson said, Dr. King's redemption will be through our actions. Now, I had been visiting Memphis for 5 years because good people in Memphis had asked us if we would be willing to come to Memphis to franchise our model. And I had resisted because I don't know anything about the South. And I don't know anything about the black-white frame. And it's totally inappropriate for me to be bringing my model to a town that I don't understand. I have no lived experience in Memphis or in the South. But I went to Dr. King's commemoration, and I was struck by that thought of Dr. King being redeemed through my actions. And I thought to my grandfather, and I thought, Grandpa, what would you do? What should I do? And he said, Mijito, do it, but enter humbly. Trust the local wisdom. Remember what happened to me. So we have a partnership now in Memphis. We're gonna help them think through what it would feel like to invite the local wisdom into a school design process for a health school that will create a generation of health advocates that will change the outcomes, the health outcomes for that community for generations forward. We're thinking upstream, and I'm so happy to be with people in Memphis that have been waiting for this opportunity to engage the local wisdom in their own communities. So with that, I invite you to pick up a Javi sticker. We've got them. And think about the young people in your own community and how you can invest in them as assets to change and transform the communities in which they live. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome founder and CEO, Leap Innovations, Phyllis Lockett.
Good morning. Good morning, and thank you, Susan. If it wasn't for organizations like yours, iNACOL, and your leadership, organizations like mine wouldn't exist. I'm so honored to be on the stage today with Carlos and Tony. This whole conversation that we're having today, how do we transform education to enable all learners to get access to a high-quality education, is very deep and personal to me. My great-grandfather, Amaziah Pleasant Smith, was born a slave on a Georgia plantation. And when he was 10, at the end of the Civil War, he was freed. And through much tribulation and travails and determination, he earned a college degree from Augusta College, which is now Morehouse College. He later became a reverend. And at that time, because there was such severe segregation happening in the South, African Americans went to school in the churches. So my great-grandfather became a teacher, and he taught African American students in this schoolhouse, the Smith Chapel School. Fast forward 100 plus years later, I grew up on the south side of Chicago. And like my great-grandparents, my parents, my godparents, all of their friends became educators for Chicago Public Schools. But my parents pushed me as far away as they could from a career in education, to get an engineering degree, to get an MBA, and a job in corporate America. And I gotta tell you, things were going great until I came home and saw this. This is the Englewood community, where my grandparents once lived, where my dad was an assistant principal, where I went to high school. And I had to ask myself, was it this bad when I was growing up? Or has it gotten worse? When I moved back to Chicago and drove through the communities in which I grew up, I was stunned and heartbroken. Last year, I had an opportunity to meet Condoleezza Rice, and she spoke at this conference and said something that has stayed with me about America. What has held us together is this aspiration and this belief that you can come from humble circumstances and you can do great things. Just like so many of you, education has been the connection for freedom and opportunity, just like it was for my family. But unfortunately, for far too many students who look like me, that connection has been broken. And that is why I started Leap Innovations. Our purpose is to bring the ideal learning experience to life, igniting the unlimited potential for each student. I believe personalized learning is the ultimate of achieving equity and access. Seeing value in every single learner, no matter what their circumstance or background is. Meeting them where they are, teaching them in their context, in the way they learn best, and not seeing their differences as deficiencies, but as opportunities to untap greatness. These beliefs are anchored in our personalized learning framework. We call it the LEAP Learning Framework. We believe personalized learning has to be tailored to each learner. It has to enable agency and student ownership. It has to be progression has to be based on mastery and demonstration of competencies. And it has to connect the learning that happens in a classroom to learning that happens outside of the classroom. We know, because learning science tells us, that when students, like the students who live in Inglewood, are filled with stress and anxiety, it impacts their brain development, and it lowers their ability to learn. But we also know that we can change that dynamic by redesigning the learning experience to counter those effects. When we go deep and understand each learner and teach them in their context and develop relationships and trust, students thrive. They thrive when we tailor learning to their needs, interests, and strengths. We call that learner focus. We also know that learners are more engaged when they own their learning, when they are partners in co-designing their learning experience, when they can work with their teachers to set goals and target their progress. We call that learner-led. We also know that students love to show what they know in multiple ways. As one student tells me, I don't have to wait for the rest of the class, I can move on. And students who need more time can get it. That's what we call learner demonstrated. We also know that learners thrive when they develop relationships and networks inside school and outside of school. And they have opportunities to get access to real-world learning experiences. We call that learner connected. We believe the presence of all of these have to be in play for personalized learning to take place. As Susan mentioned, the World Economic Forum has said that 65% of our elementary students will be in jobs that don't yet exist. We have got to create learning experiences like these in order to develop the cognitive flexibility, collaboration skills, critical thinking skills, to prepare our students for a future that we can't yet predict. But this starts first by us fitting into the shoes of our students. So many people think that personalized learning is, oh, I've got great, cool furniture, I've got the station rotations, I've got cool technology. But at LEAP, we have learned that personalized learning begins and ends in us getting a deep understanding of every single student and seeing every student as an individual. In so many cases, our teachers show up and say, I already know my kids. I'm already differentiating learning. What are you talking about? And we have our teachers do an empathy walk, shadow their students, interview families, ask the questions about what they like, what they don't like, what's working for them, and why. And by and large, many come back to our professional development training with a level of humility. I really didn't know my students. And that is the pivot point that enables our school teams to start thinking about an important question. They ask themselves, what would be true if we were tailoring learning to every single student? What would I have to do to change? A school that asks themselves that question is Belmont Cragen Elementary School, located on the northwest side of Chicago. This school started by developing learner-led or learner-focused approaches. They walked the communities of Belmont-Cragen. They conducted parent focus groups. They talked to their students and shadowed them. And that opened the door for them to think more creatively about how they would redesign the school to tailor learning for every child. As they walked through the community, they realized that the behaviors that were happening in school had nothing to do with school. It had everything to do with what was happening to the students outside of school. They interviewed the parents and realized that parents were not confident to get involved with their students' education because of their low education attainment, and they didn't speak English very well. This school is 80% free and reduced lunch and 60% English language learners. So it was that moment that the school team thought about, how do we redesign this experience? And one of the first things that they did was they engaged in a learner-connected effort to create a project where students went into the community to create initiatives. They did a community cleanup. They established a park bench at a nearby park that was not that safe. And they created this one bench where anyone could sit on that bench as a signal that they need help. These projects moved these students from being victims of their community to becoming champions for change. Belmont-Cragen also made a huge amount of progress on learner-led. This is one of my favorite pictures where they partnered with another school on the north side of Chicago to create peer-to-peer trainings on how students could lead their own student-teacher conferences. Imagine, students teaching students how to sit down with their teachers. They come in with their paperwork, they share their learnings and what happened from the last learning cycle. They are talking to their teachers about their progress, and they're working with their teachers to set goals for the next learning cycle. It is really something to see. This is Emily. Emily was a third grader when we started doing personalized learning in her school 4 years ago. And Emily was a very shy student and was not performing very well. She was at the bottom quartile in both math and reading. But as her teachers started learning more about Emily and her context and developed her personalized learning pathway, one of the things that they had Emily do was get involved in the Student Ambassador Program. Fast forward 4 years later, Emily is in 7th grade, and she is now the leader of the Student Ambassadors Program. She has found her confidence, and she has blossomed in ways that are just incredible. She is actually meeting reading standards, and she is exceeding math standards. I'm really thrilled that we have worked with schools like Emily's School, Belmont-Cragen, and over 120 schools across the Chicago area. And we have discovered that students who are participating in our program are performing 13 percentile points better than the comparison student. And while that's exciting, we have a lot more to do. More importantly, we're seeing this, we are reducing student behavioral challenges and suspensions, as well as increasing attendance. But more importantly, kids are excited to come to school. We were happy to partner with iNACOL and the Center for Reinventing Public Education on a study for the country that looks at the status of personalized learning happening in the classroom from the perspective of teachers and from the perspective of students. And what we found is that while educators are excited and are doing more to deepen on learner focus and understand their learners and shaping the learning experiences accordingly, they are a bit more reticent about releasing control, about learner-led and learner-demonstrated approaches. And if we are serious about personalizing learning, we have got to enable students to have some ownership of their learning experience. We have got to enable competency-based progression. Those are pretty critical if we are going to go forward with this work. Another important element around this is about rigor. TNTP just completed a report, I think you all have seen it, that showed that children of color are 25% more likely not to receive rigorous content. Meeting students where they are does not mean lowering rigor. We have got to keep our students as standard. Lowering rigor is not equity, but we also have to realize that just presenting the same content to every student without any regard for their context or their needs is not equity. I believe that we can do both. We can rigorously help every single student reach their highest goal and tend to their individual needs. When I think about my great-grandfather, I am reminded that the circumstances under which you were born does not dictate your future. He became a teacher and taught many students to live in freedom in an environment that was full of extreme adversity. So I know that today, in this room, with the power of these incredible people that I see in front of me, the skills, the will, and the resources, that we can create a high-quality learning experience for each and every student so they can realize their freedom and their dreams. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Co-Executive Director, Big Picture Learning, Carlos Moreno.
Good morning. It is an honor to be here with you all, and I find myself still very moved by that amazing performance from our young people and their voices. And I am incredibly appreciative and thankful for my colleagues in this work, Susan, Tony, and Phyllis, who have helped us set the atmosphere for not just this morning, but for the remainder of this week. I also am appreciative of you all for allowing me to yield my first 20 seconds to the brilliant voice of Pulitzer Prize winner, Mr. Kendrick Lamar. I'd like to recognize that we are, in this particular state, is named after the ancient Cherokee city of Tanasi, and that we are on land that was once of the Shawnee and Cherokee tribes. I ask that you all please join me in one brief moment of silence as we make the space necessary so that we can hear the voices of those that have come before us. Thank you. In this work, I believe it is necessary to listen to the stories. The most present story for me is that of the students, families, and communities that we serve at Big Picture Learning. The beautiful Black and brown students, and those students that have been kept furthest from opportunity, who have personally borne witness to an educational experience that has placed great trust in them and has honored their voices. But I also hear other voices. I hear the voices of my ancestors who remind me that I come from a long line of very proud people and that in so many ways I am living their wildest dreams and that they are always watching me. I hear the voice of the good Reverend Dr. King, who reminds me that I am a servant to his message, and that my work and our collective work does not stop until all young people have equitable access and opportunity, and that we are all servants to the movement. And 50 years ago, Dr. King delivered his famous Drum Major Instinct sermon at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, where he delivered and shared this very clear definition of what it means to be a servant and what is necessary to be in a place to do so.
If you want to be important, wonderful. If you want to be recognized, wonderful. If you want to be great, wonderful. But recognize that he who is greatest among you shall be your servant. That's a new definition of greatness. And this morning, the thing that I like about it, by giving that definition of greatness, it means that everybody can be great. Because everybody can serve. You don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make your subject and your verb agree to serve. You don't have to know about Plato and Aristotle to serve. You don't have to know Einstein's theory of relativity to serve. You don't have to know the second theory of thermodynamics in physics to serve. You only need a heart full of grace. Soul generated by love. And you can be that servant.
All you need is a heart full of grace. And speaking of souls generated by love, I hear the voice of my daughter. I'm honored to introduce you all to 13-year-old Isabella Moreno. Here and now, huge shout out to all the middle school teachers and all the middle school parents in the house. Big shout out. The struggle is real. The struggle is real. So Isabella has become increasingly more frustrated with her father's travel schedule. And in one of my few moments of parental brilliance, I started engaging with her before my travels, letting her know where I'd be going, who I'd be speaking with, and what it is that I'd be hoping to share. And before sitting down with Isabella, prior to coming to Nashville, she stopped me in my tracks, looked me dead in my face, and said, "Dad, ain't nobody got time for that. Whatever you're planning to do, make sure you stick to the stories." And then there's this other voice that I constantly hear that I really try to suppress and ignore, but I just can't seem to shake. And that is the voice of a much less humble Carlos. And often he's annoying. What he'd want me to do right now in my remaining 10 minutes is to stand here and tell you how dope and amazing my organization and colleagues at Big Picture Learning are, and how we've been establishing incredible learning spaces in schools for over 20 years, filled with passionate students, tremendous human beings dedicated to young people, and how as an organization, we are continuing to influence the national discourse around what schools can and should look like. But I'm actually not here to talk about that today. I'm here to actually talk about what I believe is a necessary first step before we can truly talk about the transformation of education in this country, and that is that we must know our students' stories and have to believe in their greatness. So on the strength of Isabella's recommendation, I'd like to share with you all a very personal, brief story. about a little girl named Anna. Now, Anna is born on a beautiful Caribbean island to a 16-year-old unwed mother named Miss Brown. Now, Miss Brown has been orphaned since the age of 10 and completely on her own since she was 14. Miss Brown has no living family members, no siblings, and she and Anna found themselves living from house to house, renting out rooms in some of the most impoverished areas of the island. Anna grows up under these conditions until about the age of 12, where she then drops out of school to help Miss Brown with their fledgling produce business that now allows them to maintain their one-bedroom place and help put food on the table. Now, Miss Brown absolutely understands the importance of an education, but she needs the help. And without it, they could potentially find themselves on the streets. Fast forward 4 years, and Anna is now 16, and has grown into a tall, statuesque, beautiful, virtuous young woman. Now, many of the men in the town had their eyes set on her because she looked so much older than she actually was. She never entertained any of their advances. She remained polite and went about her business, especially because she and everyone else knew that Ms. Brown was always watching, and she was known to be one tough lady. 10 months later, at the age of 17, Anna gives birth to a beautiful baby girl. She names her Griselda, which is Old German for Christian battle. Miss Brown is absolutely beside herself. She does not approve of this path that Anna was on, and it often showed in how she treated Anna in public. Anna grew tired of this treatment and decided she needed to leave Miss Brown's home. So she and Griselda moved to the capital city, where Anna began working at a large hotel. After working at the hotel for 6 years, Anna has an opportunity to come to the United States, but she needs to leave Griselda behind with Miss Brown. Reluctantly, she does so. She arrives in New York City, and she meets a charming man from her home island. He befriends her. He's extremely generous, but he's aggressive. And over time, he becomes physically abusive. Anna remains in the relationship primarily out of fear. To shelter herself from her abusive partner, she immerses herself into a world of books at her local library in Brooklyn. She quickly catches the attention of those in upper management, as she is articulate. She's knowledgeable of current events. I mean, the sister's impressive. Anna makes the decision very quickly after that to leave her abusive partner at this point of 3 years. And despite the continued threats, she does so. A few months later, Miss Brown and Griselda join her in New York. Griselda starts grade school. Miss Brown starts working at the same hotel, and things are looking good. On Christmas Eve of that same year, Anna's ex-abusive partner interrupts their holiday dinner brandishing a .25 caliber handgun. And after a brief dispute, he proceeds to shoot Anna twice. And although she survives, she loses sight in one eye, hearing in one ear, and is permanently disfigured. And due to the cocktail of medications that she's forced to take, she develops a host of kidney issues, lung complications, and heart problems. After recuperating for 18 months, she is then hired as a personal housekeeper for one of the hotel owners. She is absolutely convinced that no one will ever want her. Enter Victoriano, a gentleman, or as we like to say, un caballero. He meets Anna, sees her beauty, her intellect, her strength, and homeboy falls immediately in love. They date, they marry, They work through 2 miscarriages and eventually have a baby boy. They name him Carlos for strength. They remain married until this day and will be celebrating 49 years together this upcoming November. I am the son of Ana and Victoriano Moreno, but I am also the son of Miss No Joke Isabel Brown. And I am the loving younger brother of Griselda. And although I have not lived these powerful life events personally, they are absolutely a part of who I am and part of my story. And they serve as a constant reminder that every day is a gift and that we must live our lives courageously fighting for those things that we want and that we believe in. It is a reminder that our life events shape who we are. Knowing who our students are is the first step in building community with and for them. And before we can truly talk about getting to a place around personalized learning, true personalized learning for every student, we have to know our students' stories. And to create the trust necessary to really hear our students' stories, as adults, we need to be willing and courageous enough to share our own stories, our own histories. Despite what many people might think, vulnerability is good pedagogy. And it is a reminder that as educators and teachers in the truest biblical definition of the word, which is to lead forward and raise up, it is important that we recognize and believe in the greatness and brilliance of all of our young people, regardless of where they come from, regardless of what they may have experienced, and the hardest part, regardless of what they may have done. Our students' demography does not equal their destiny. And to do this, what it's going to require is that we embrace a common sense that we've spent a lifetime ignoring. That as to be the best educators, leaders, policymakers, and influencers that we can be, is that we all must be unapologetically and relentlessly student-centered. Unapologetic, relentless, student-centered. A good friend of mine this past week shared with me a very powerful quote by the late, great Dr. Maya Angelou, where Dr. Angelou said, "People will forget what you did, people will forget what you said, but people will never forget how you made them feel." So as we move forward this week and beyond in the Truest conversations around really transforming education in this country, let us continue to make spaces for those voices that matter to us, that speak to this heart's work. Let's continue to lead fearlessly for the young people that we care so deeply about. And let's not forget to love hard while we do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, I'm so grateful for you sharing that, and I'm so moved right now. And it just brings us back. This is work on the heart. This is work on the soul. We're talking about the souls and lives of so many around us. Take a moment and just have a moment of reflection and gratitude. Oh, Carlos, I had my first question for you. I can take a moment. Tony, can I start
Sure.
with you? When we think about this idea of students and students developing agency that we've all talked so much about, how are you seeing students develop that agency and get that agency to drive that transformation forward?
So, Susan, thank you. And I agree, this is a very moving experience. And I think the greatest transformation in my own career has been moving from this idea of trying to connect kids to jobs in some impersonal, transactional way, into this understanding that youth development is the essential quotient to preparing young people to being able to be successful in their future life. You must feel valued, and you must feel that you have something to offer and something to say in order for you to seize on your future. And so agency is deeply connected to a youth development strategy, which our schools need to have. And we think, typically as adults, we think, well, what's the problem? You know, there's all these jobs and there's all these kids, why can't we just match them up? But we forget that maybe young people don't see that in their future. And it's our job to develop, through a youth development strategy, their ability to imagine themselves in that place.
Oh, agency?
Yeah, or I can come back around. So Carlos, again, thank you so much. When we're looking at students, what positive outcomes have you seen for students in your work, in your communities? And I know as I've traveled around the globe and I've asked people that have been in these really powerful school communities, like, where did you learn how to do this? So many of them have said, well, do you know big picture in the US? And I nod. So I'm so grateful that just the ideas and the work that you've done has this ripple effect that's happening globally. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Find that most of the times when folks ask the question around outcomes, they're looking for very clear data points when we talk about those. And clearly I didn't focus my talk on data points in that way, intentionally so. But for us, I think a lot of, especially high schools, measure their success around number of students that graduate, right? And then how many of them, the kind of the gold standard that has been there has been like how many of your students are actually going on to college, right? And while the majority of our students do go to college and persist at very high rates and graduate at higher rates, I'd have to say that all of them don't go to college and make the decision not to go. And we're really focused on students, in addition to all the other outcomes, but on students developing their social capital, right? We know that's a very important thing in this world of ours. So, and interestingly, a friend of ours, Julia Freeland-Fisher, is here, and I know that she's done extensive research on the importance of who students know, compared to what students know. And a very clear data point for us, I'd have to say, that we're very proud of is that those students that choose not to go on to college, over 75% of them land family-sustaining employment through their internship experiences, which they had in high school. So, which also directly correlates to, as we know, income and growth and moving up the scales in society. So But I'd also want to take a second to also just shameful plug for the session that we have going on later, because we have some phenomenal students who are here, both current and alumni, who are doing some phenomenal things. And I think the value of what they see as their success and what they're most proud of is just as important to us, how they identify that.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing students with you too, and sharing that voice and that stage with students as well. I know in talking to Andrew Frischman, who works with you at Big Picture, this kind of getting into this interesting idea around outcomes and some of the work that you're doing with the internship. We didn't even talk about the internship platform, and I know Tony's using that in his work, but this idea of a broader set of outcomes and looking at all different measures, that one of them that I believe Andrew was talking about is following the course of students in their lives, even on LinkedIn. We have these ways of saying, are you achieving the fulfillment and the success on your hopes and dreams? And it's really about that goal orientation that I think I was trying to point to earlier. In other countries, when you see these innovative schools, it's about what are the goals for students and how are we building up the educational experiences to meet those goals? And I just think you're doing groundbreaking, amazing work and following those students throughout their lives to have productive lives too. So thank you. Phyllis, did you want to jump in on how students are developing agency or what positive outcomes you're seeing in Chicago? I know when we first met and before you started LEAP and were thinking about doing this, I mean, there really weren't new models taking hold in Chicago. And the fact that you're working with over 120 schools now, both districts and charter schools, that you can create this umbrella and see this change happen in just 5 years is amazing. So what are you seeing in terms of the positive outcomes with students and communities?
Yeah, I'm really grateful for that. The kind of this notion when we started, and Susan knows that when this was an idea, I asked Susan if she would come to Chicago and talk to some of our school leaders about what was happening at the time. We were talking about it in terms of blended learning. And, you know, she was brilliant and kind and generous, and, you know, she didn't know who the heck I was, right? And she just decided she came anyway. But, you know, in the conversation, it just kind of went like this, because folks were just trying to figure out, how do I survive to get to the next day? You know, the constant pressures that our schools are under all across this country, you know, having to do more with less. And that's what really inspired me to do LEAP. But having come out of the charter school movement and, you know, the bridge to working now, I think we're working with more traditional public schools and charter schools and archdiocese schools, and nobody cares. It's so great, it's so freeing. Nobody really cares because everyone is working together in partnership to figure out how do we tailor learning for every single student and how do we learn from each other. And it's grown because this whole agency aspect where, you know, we have schools, and I'm sure Distinctive Schools is out there. It's one of our first partners and amazing partners, really kind of became the host site for so many schools across our city to come and see how this can happen. How can you release control? How can you, you know, with guardrails, right? How do you have students earn the kind of autonomy that is needed in order for them to start really owning their learning? And so, to your point, we've been very fortunate. We have a partnership with the district where we have a data sharing agreement. We know we're getting progress on MAP. I think the next step is really getting to those social and emotional learning metrics that ultimately matter. And that is the next phase of what we're going to be working on. And we are in partnership with Turnaround for Children and Pam Cantor. I know she's going to be speaking as a keynote at this conference. So it's just a very exciting time with all the incredible collaboration and opportunity that we have to transform this experience for kids.
Yeah, does anybody else want to weigh in on this sense of broader outcomes? I mean, I do really worry that our sense of outcomes is too narrowly focused and that what were meant to be floors have become ceilings in too many places. And it is this combination of pressures and trying to operate in traditional environments makes it really, really difficult. Oh, there's a sense of urgency that is all around us that I know is palpable. Tony, do you want to talk a little bit about like how you think about outcomes and this different maybe way of coming to it?
Yeah. One of the things that we've learned is that as we scale up our internship program, we have a paid internship program, which we'll also be making a presentation about if anyone wants to come, where our students have a year-long paid internship and a professional work experience. And what we have found is that that's not enough. So what they need is they need transition support beyond high school. So our kids are overage, undercredited. They have this really beautiful work experience and they have a mentor and they really learn what they're good at. And they have an imagination for what they could become. But through that transition, the ball gets dropped. So who's holding on to that young person and guiding them through a transition to college, certificates, gainful employment? And as was said, there's a social capital issue, and it doesn't get fixed just with an internship, at least in our case. So we need to stay with our young people, and we need to help coach them through the rest of their lives, at least for the few years after they've graduated high school. And so our hope is that through a longitudinal work of following our young people, that we will have made an impact, not just measured by graduation rates, but measured by them changing their lot, a life-changing experience, which will be a community-changing experience. Because ultimately, we think about our work as making our communities healthier and more prosperous. And if our work doesn't result in a healthier and more prosperous community, then I think we've failed. And so following those young people to make that happen is the foundation of our work going forward.
Thank you. And I know we haven't had a lot of time to dig in, but I know that in the different experiences that learners engage in across all of the work that you're doing, there are really important pieces on portfolios and exhibitions of learning and involving the community and the students presenting their work and having panels that cross like inside of school and outside of school. Does that help convey the sense of urgency to make this shift? I mean, how do we think about conveying urgency, or how do you think about conveying the urgency that in a way that allows students to open up and try new things, or parents and educators to act? Really, I mean, the unit of change that we're talking about is the educator, the student, and the parent. And we can talk all we want about policies, and there still are policy barriers that are really sending signals that are different than maybe about this broader vision that we have. But like, how do you convey that need to act with parents and students and teachers?
I think one way is getting parents involved, and the school example that I shared in my talk, Bill Montcragen, the connection point between families and parents and the school was made. They actually have now parents working, 2 parents in each classroom, and they provide professional development to the parents. And these are parents that were really reticent about getting involved because of their educational attainment and lack of English skills. These parents not only connected to the context of personalized learning, they saw their students more engaged, They, with the principal, lobbied the mayor of Chicago to give them a new school site. They took over. So this park that I was describing, gang-infested, really tough area, this beautiful building was sitting dormant, and they're like, we need this building, and we want to bring services, Laurie Children's Hospital, lots of other community services into our building so we can have a school that represents our community. And they just got approval for it.
Yeah.
I think that's a system for change. That's how you do it. And so I think that's the other challenge that I think a lot of us school reformers have in thinking that, okay, if we can just work with the teachers and help our students, we can get there. And that is not the unit of change. It starts with everything you're talking about, which is the community.
To build on Phyllis's excellent point, I believe that sadly, even when schools or systems say that they're going to go into parental and family and community engagement, they do so with this very pre-prescribed, this is how you do it, here's your checklist, and it's just kind of very rote, and that just doesn't work, right? Like, we need to have the flexibility and honestly engage with families and communities in ways that allow them to truly engage in ways that they know they can. So parent engagement, I feel like it's a priority for every school, every district. We want to engage parents, but don't see setting up this kind of like checklist and pre-prescribed way of involving. These are the ways that you can get involved. They also have ideas, and
It has to be personalized.
It has to be personalized.
One thought about that. So oftentimes, and this was my experience before my current work, educators, oftentimes they'll come to the community and they'll say, here's what we're doing, can you help us? And they very frequently do they ask, what are you doing? Can we help you? And that sense of reciprocity is missing from our schools. And until we reorient ourselves to a sense of what's good, it's mutually beneficial, our school is good for you and you're good for our school, and what are you working on and how can we help you accomplish your goals? We will have disenfranchised communities until we start serving them, as opposed to just asking them to help us make our model better, more effective. That's not really a pathway toward a reciprocal relationship with communities.
Thank you. And I think that's a beautiful, beautiful moment and idea to end on, in really honing in on this idea of reciprocity, and that there is a way forward as we think about designs that are putting the student at the whole and putting the community at the whole. What does that reciprocity look like in the path forward on as we think of, I hate using words like continuous improvement, but engaging the community in the ownership and the co-ownership with our students and our teachers and our parents. That is how this change is happening, and it's happening from the ground up, and it's happening all over the country, and we saw this in the national landscape scan and the research that we've done, but it's happening from educators designing and building professional learning communities. And we could stay up here, and I would love to dig in around professional learning and all of the work that's happening, but that is 4 sessions to come, and I want to thank everyone for being here in the opening, and I want to thank Carlos, Phyllis, Tony, your leadership, your heart, your servant leadership that you bring to this. I am personally incredibly grateful and inspired and feeling deep love for you and the work that you're doing. So thank you, and enjoy and welcome.
Yay.